Hello, Anne. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Tom. Welcome. Sorry, I'm muting myself. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great. Hang on one second. I'm multitasking for a second. I'll be right back.
Sure.
And I'm back. Hi, John. How are you? Hi, Kelvin.
Great. Welcome, Tom. And we're also joined by Christine Reilley, our ASME panelist.
I see Christine up there as well. Hi, Christine.
Hello, Tom.
You know, Christine, we've been spending a lot of time together. That's great. Thank you.
Yes, especially on YouTube.
John, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. I trust you've been busy.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm trying to, I think we've got almost 100 participants already. It's very exciting.
That's great.
We'll give it a few more minutes.
Okay. And we got to get you some ASME background.
Oh my gosh, I tried. You can ask Aaron. It gives me creepy googly eyes because it comes through my eyes and it doesn't work on my computer. We tried different backgrounds and it was just more distracting than anything else. So, but yes, I'm working on it, I promise.
There's probably a Zoom update that you need to download to your laptop.
We were joking that it just shows that my soul is all ASME. It's coming out from within.
Yeah. Kelvin, you look very formal there. Thank you for wearing a tie.
Well, you don't know what I look like from the waist down, right? Because there a news reporter that had an accident. No, I felt like I never have a reason to wear a tie anymore. So why not once in a while?
You know, in my majority of my career, I never wore a tie. I was the first one in New York to always wear a silk T-shirt and some type of high-end suit. But I had one guy that's used to work for CBS Records. That's how long ago it was. He was accusing me of showing Steve Jobs how to dress. But it was just much more comfortable.
Let's just give it a couple more minutes to allow people to get on, get settled. We'll get started at 2:17, so in 2 minutes.
Are we live now?
Yeah.
On YouTube, yes.
And I think we're at 2:16. I think we should go.
We just want to give people, we're going to say 2:17, give them 1 more minute. We had a couple more people coming in. So 30 more seconds, then we're going to go. All right, Tom, we're going to kick it off with you.
Well, thank you, Ann. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Costabile. I'm ASME's Executive Director and CEO, and I'm pleased to welcome you to ASME's inaugural virtual congressional briefing. We're excited to be able to connect with all of you, both on Capitol Hill and in this new format. As many of you, I'm sure, my life has become some type of a video meeting 24/7. But here we're today to discuss an important issue that's affecting the future of the pandemic response in the US. Specifically, we'll talk a little bit about how ASME and Manufacturing USA programs are working hard to ensure we come out of this pandemic more resilient. And I can trust you from my conversations, there's many, many people all on the same page. It's very, very comforting. As a trusted source of expertise and information, we are proud to host this event and remind you that just because we're working remotely doesn't mean and should not continue to research excuse me, new ways to support you. In this new era of social distancing and upheaval of routine, having a robust manufacturing industry is more imperative than ever. From addressing the shortages of protective equipment for essential workers to identifying new vaccines and ways to keep us healthy over the long term, the US manufacturing industry plays an integral role in ensuring our world post-COVID-19 is a safe and, most importantly, a sustainable one. ASME convenes these types of events to provide policymakers and interested parties with information from subject matter experts in key technical areas. We believe it's important to show that these developments and what they mean to the future of our economy, our workforce, and most importantly, our collective quality of life. We're honored today to be joined by two of the Manufacturing USA Institute leaders, not just in the pandemic response, but in bolstering America's manufacturing across the board. Also with us is one of our ASME staff members who's been very active in the COVID-19 crisis, and also the ability to connect individuals to do more to get to resolution. I want to thank you. I want you to know that ASME is here to support you. And through I'm having one heck of a time today because of my allergies, and I apologize. I also look forward to connecting again with many of you in person because I really truly enjoy our events in Washington, D.C. With that, Ann, I'll go back to sneezing and choking here. I'm not sick. It's the oak pollen here in Texas that's got me today. But thank you all for joining us. I look forward to the next hour. Ann?
Great. Thanks, Tom. I want to echo Tom's remarks and thank everyone for joining us today. We are joined, as Tom mentioned, by a panel of 3 esteemed speakers who all bring a unique yet important perspective to our topic of discussion today. Our first speaker is Mr. John Wilczynski, Executive Director of America Makes. America Makes plays a pivotal role in bolstering US 3D printing and additive manufacturing capabilities, and they are now leveraging their knowledge and expertise in bringing together key government agencies and leading experts in the fight against COVID-19. Our second speaker is Mr. Kelvin Lee, Institute Director of the National Institute for Innovative Manufacturing for Biopharmaceuticals, more colloquially known as NIIMBL. Through their work in biomanufacturing, NIIMBL has played an essential role in bringing together life-saving technologies to the market. Our third speaker is Ms. Reilley, Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation here at ASME. Engineering capacity is a key pillar of manufacturing, and with a membership base of over 100,000, ASME is uniquely positioned to bring together key players and industries in response to events such as the pandemic, while also serving as a thought leader as we look to push the boundaries of what is possible. So with that, just a couple very quick housekeeping notes. Please hold all your questions until the end. We're going to do a great large Q&A with everyone at the very end. We're going to be using the Q&A function, so if you have any questions, just type in your question. You can direct it to a specific panelist. And with that, I'm excited to turn, oh, and also you are being recorded. We're going to record this for purposes for everyone to be able to use it as a resource following the event. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Mr. John Wilczynski, Executive Director of America Makes.
Unmute. All right. Thank you so much, Ann. Can you give me permission to share? It says I cannot share.
You should now be able to share, John. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Where did it go? Sorry, too many windows open. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the efforts that we've taken on at America Makes, talk you through our response to date, where we're at with things, how we got started in this, and then maybe most importantly, talk through how we feel the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes can be better positioned to help in supporting future crises as they may, or we certainly know will come up. So just to give you a quick overview of America Makes. So we are the Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute. We're a Department of Defense Innovation Institute. We've been working at this for almost 8 years now. This summer will be in our 8th year. We've worked very closely with a number of partners on the phone, especially ASME. They've been with us really from the beginning. But our real core function, and all of the institutes serve this function, but across different advanced manufacturing technologies, is to organize a community. And we really see our biggest opportunity is to help lead in the communication, convening, and coordinating of the additive manufacturing ecosystem. And we've been working on that for years, and we've really now started to hone our focus specifically as it relates to the COVID-19 crisis. We've developed something called AMCPR, which we're calling the Advanced Manufacturing Crisis Production Response. And it's really the initiative that we've been working on for the past, I guess this is week 7 now that we've really been diving headfirst into how do we ensure that the folks who are trying to help, which there are many, are as well organized as possible and are enabled to deliver safe and effective products. That's really what we're all trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And we want to make sure that we're providing as much means as possible in order to get people in well positioned to do that. We were set up with some initial funding by OSD, that is the organization that we work with, being a DoD institute, to really help us get this initiative started. We started, 7 or so weeks ago by reaching out to members, trying to figure out how we can help. Everyone wanted to help, but we weren't exactly sure how to help. So we came together, put together a plan, and really started working closely on driving collaboration within our industry to help best support the crisis. And we thought our opportunity to do that was really through understanding demand, understanding capacity, and maybe most importantly, ensure we're focused on a vetted design so that people are working on the right product. So I'll talk a little bit more about our relationship with some of the federal agencies as we go through the slides. If we look through the current state of where AMCPR is, we got out of the gate very quickly. Honestly, it all really started for us back in March, a couple days into our shelter-in-place activities, and we reached out to a number of members. That led to more discussions, which ultimately led to reaching out to federal agencies, asking a laundry list of questions, and really, documenting for our membership and for the community at large concerns that we had about lack of a trusted repository for data, lack of an understanding of demand signals, lack of vetted and evaluated designs. And there was a series of different items that were created. So through this response, we ultimately worked through the development of the system that we're calling AMCPR. We initiated and created a portal. So that lives today on our website, and it's active, and hundreds of folks have come and signed up as either a manufacturer, as someone from the needs community, or the third group is someone from the design community. And there's a couple of different workflows that we've been putting a lot of energy in. I think the key enabler to this was our partnership, or collaboration is probably the best word, between the FDA, the VA, and NIH. So there's a formal MOU that's in place between the government organizations. We've been working very closely from day one. I actually called them out specifically in a letter that I had submitted of needing to establish needing to establish a process. We've been talking for weeks about what this process is, so I won't spend a lot of time digging into that, but really it's been this connection to these organizations that has enabled us to create a repository of evaluated and tested designs that can be used as community use items or in clinical settings. And there's a number of different product that fall into that category. We had very early on, within days of getting established, we had hundreds of manufacturers across most of the states. We were able to connect, 100,000+ pieces of PPE requests to between the needs community and the manufacturing community. So the stats that are on the right-hand side of the page are, really stats from the first week and a half of activity. There's many more designs in process. We've been, on a daily basis meeting with FDA, VA, and NIH for the last 7 weeks. It's been a fantastic relationship. The folks that are working that on, the government side are tremendously dedicated, working through very complex problems. But we've been able to help coordinate that industry and even reach out to a number of other agencies who are trying to get involved and really show their support to get to the point where we have evaluated designs that we know the community can use. So we're continuing to mature that. We want to make sure, whether you're a manufacturer that's familiar with the healthcare space or someone who is not, you very quickly understand where you can enter the market and where it makes sense for you to engage and what those rules of engagement are. So I could talk for, couple hours about that, but we certainly don't have time. If there's questions about any of this, we're very interested in talking outside of here. There's a way too complicated diagram on the screen right now, and it really just talks to how we're prioritizing products. So we've gone through, we initially based our entire matrix on the FEMA emergency needs list, then quickly down selected that to items that can be printed or make sense to print. We worked through that very closely with the VA and FDA. And then we started to look through a process of, prioritization by demand, by manufacturing process, by regulatory criteria. It ultimately led to different prioritization. And those buckets, it's been amazing how quickly those priorities have shifted. So some of the things that maybe are in tier 4 right now, in the last couple of days have skyrocketed to what is top priority. So I won't belabor this slide much. This is really about communicating. There is a tremendous amount of, thought that has gone into this process, and there's many, many folks, working together on this. So that's kind of a quick recap of some of what we've been doing. So we've seen, a great opportunity to leverage what we're learning right now in this current COVID crisis to create a national infrastructure and a capability that can better prepare the United States for future crises. We know they're going to come. We don't know whether it's going to be a natural disaster, a cyber attack, a terrorist attack, or another health crisis, but we certainly know they're coming. And we see a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of what we're all collectively working on right now. But the key is making sure that we're organized. That's one thing I think we've learned. We're talking a lot about after action reports and those kinds of things. And there's tremendous value in looking back at what we've gone through. So we've gone through, a rapid response phase. We've developed some of that capability. There's plenty more to be done, but we've done some of that. We've worked, like many, on convening the ecosystem. But there's a tremendous opportunity of what can be done still in this current crisis, as well as in future crises, and better preparation as a country around scaling capability, creating a resilient supply chain at all levels, meaning local or regional, state and federal, and then making sure that we're exercising this capability. So we know we've got to build a much more robust digital infrastructure to manage this ecosystem, manage the capabilities. As difficult as it has been to create and get designs that have been vetted, that's been the easy part of the problem. Getting the supply chain organized and activated is really where we need to develop capability and then ultimately exercise that. So we've got a lot of ideas on where this needs to go, learning from where we've been in the past month and a half. We feel that a development of a roadmap and really the playbook, maybe more importantly, so roadmap so we know how to invest properly, a playbook so we understand how and the steps that need to be put in place in different pieces of, whether that's government or on industry side, how do we work together to work through that? Certainly feel there is a need for a model repository at some level. We have leveraged a collection of models that has been available through NIH. We've actually worked with them on another project. That's how we were familiar with them, and it made sense for this current health crisis. I think the key takeaway for us is we need to make sure that this is something that's trusted by those who are going to use it, including business, government, et cetera. We need to make sure it doesn't depend on a specific crisis. So we, as I mentioned, know this is going to be diverse over the years, and this may have been a once in a lifetime. Hopefully that's the case, but we certainly know there will be other crises that we should be better prepared for. At this point is really where I think Manufacturing USA Institutes and the public-private relationships that our organization, that Kelvin at NIIMBL, and all of the other institutes have developed puts us in a really good position to amplify and really, maybe most importantly, coordinate our message. So from our point of view, what's needed, we've really seen that, there's been a lot of attention provided to different emerging technologies over these past couple of years. One that has actually proven its role in providing a critical response to this crisis has been additive manufacturing. Others have played a role, certainly, but additive has squarely stepped up and proven its capability from prototyping to bridge manufacturing to ultimately, becoming a, quote unquote, conventional process that can be used to manufacture different types of product that are needed. So there's tremendous opportunity, but we have to develop a national strategy on how we're going to make sure we are driving the technology and ultimately becoming, not just competitive within the US, but ultimately the global leader here, build a robust R&D strategy around advanced and additive manufacturing, and then ultimately leverage these public-private partnerships that we have in place. We have tremendous resources available. We need to make sure that they're well organized and ultimately positioned properly. So this is just a quick takeaway. I'm sure these will be made available. That's my email address. We have a couple of different sites that you can connect to. Certainly interested in continuing the conversation. We have a lot more ideas about, potential legislation, et cetera, that aligns back to some of those topics of what is needed next. So happy to discuss that with anyone who might be interested. So appreciate the opportunity and appreciate ASME coordinating all of this activity.
Great. Thank you, John. And with that, we're going to kick it off next to NIIMBL. Kelvin, we're excited to hear what NIIMBL's been working on.
Great. So appreciate ASME organizing this activity, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today. I'm going to just start with a couple of slides on the context for who NIIMBL is for those who aren't familiar, and then cover a little bit about how NIIMBL has been responding, and then also close with some policy thoughts and considerations moving forward. Our NIIMBL mission is to accelerate biopharmaceutical manufacturing innovation, as well as support the development of standards for more efficient and rapid manufacturing capability, as well as educate and train a world-leading workforce. Now, our mission space is really medicines where biology is critical to the manufacturing of those medicines. So it includes things like recombinant proteins and antibodies. It includes vaccines. It includes things like cell and gene therapies. And I'm not going to carry you through the whole slide, but just for context, we think that NIIMBL can play a really important role, not only in our global competitiveness around manufacturing, but certainly in onshoring of biopharmaceutical manufacturing and supply chains, as well as in helping secure supplies of medicines in response to public health threats. We count about 140 members currently. That is large and small industry, universities, and community colleges. And we've been very fortunate to have substantial engagement across a wide cross-section of federal agencies. NIST is our sponsor agency in the Department of Commerce, but also we have very deep engagement with the FDA, NIH, DoD, and others. This focus areas just reflects, again, what I mentioned before, where biology is critical to the manufacturing of medicine is really where we find our primary expertise. Whether it's in existing products like vaccines and therapeutic proteins or antibodies, as well as in some of the newest modalities that are coming to market in more personalized medicines, cell therapies, and gene therapies. And the next slide is just a logo slide, just to give you a feel for the kinds of partners that we have. Some of the bigger companies are listed closer to the top and include both drug product manufacturers as well as large vendors and suppliers to the industry. We also have a very close relationship with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through an initiative we call the Global Health Fund. And then you can see the expertise and partners from the rest of our community. We've been pretty engaged in both some very specific activities as well as some broad-ranging ecosystem development and building activities. On this slide, I'm just trying to reflect a few specific examples of things that we have been working on as it relates to COVID response. In this top example, we engaged with our own staff in a collaboration with a local hospital system to develop a PCR-based diagnostic assay that, as you'll know from the news, is obviously the first established diagnostic assay. But in our case, we're trying to look for a way to rely on alternate supply chains and equipment and infrastructure that would get away from some of the current concerns. And we were able to recently validate a new test that we think is right now pending emergency use authorization. But we think if authorized, not only will this increase local testing capacity, but if you scale it out to its likely potential, this could actually lead up to 500,000 tests a week potentially. So, it's an exciting technology for us because expanding supply chain, the diversity of supply chains to do testing, we think is a critical need. In the second bullet point, one of our members has been working on powered air purifying respirators. They already are in this business space with NIOSH certification for these for this PPE. But in response to the pandemic and the outbreak, they've looked at onshoring some of the supply chains, including updating a little bit of the design of their technology to rely more on commercial off-the-shelf components, which is accelerating their production capabilities. And their goal is 10x or greater manufacturing capacity, which, from what I understand, they are on target to achieve. The third example is just supply chain modeling and looking at how best to address some of the supply chain constraints and issues. In our case, we're focused on testing. So that's both PCR-based testing as well as serological testing for antibodies. And then the last bullet point is, we're spending a lot of time thinking about strategies and curriculum and content to address what is going to be a very large number of students who are going to graduate, whether that's from high schools or from colleges and universities who are going to graduate into a very deep recession. And how do you think about using that as an opportunity to offer some of the skills needed in some of the spaces that we work in terms of biopharmaceutical manufacturing? One thing that we did was a community call to action to solicit ideas. John mentioned with America Makes and their initiative, a powerful aspect of these institutes is around the ability to convene the ecosystem. And so we dropped an email to our community with, we were pretty tight-lipped. We didn't actually send signals that we were going to do this. We dropped an email on Friday, April 3rd at 10:30 in the morning, asking for ideas and proposals from our community, and gave a 2 o'clock that same day webinar about a process for potentially selecting some ideas and looking for funding opportunities. And we set the deadline as the following Monday at 3 o'clock. We only made this available because of limited resources to our NIIMBL member community, but we didn't limit the ideas to biopharmaceutical manufacturing technologies. We opened it up more broadly and invited submissions on any topic that NIIMBL subject matter expertise could contribute to solutions. Even in that one business day turnaround time, we received over 200 submissions in response to our request. Ideas led from small businesses, from large global companies, from universities and academic medical centers, from federal scientists and others. We're right now going through a process to try to finalize and understand which projects are going to be best positioned for launch and impact in a very short timeline. But I wanted to reflect here, so I can't tell you exactly what those projects are going to be just yet, but I want to reflect here the categories of ideas that came to our community. And of course, they relate to testing, whether that's antibody testing, PCR methods, and others. A significant amount of expertise in contact tracing technologies for tracking people, for tracking equipment, for tracking manufacturing operations, decontamination technologies, of course, personal protective equipment, both development of new as well as just manufacturing and scale up. As you might expect, a lot of activity in medical countermeasures, both in discovery and development and manufacturing. And for us, this is small molecules, as well as large molecules, as well as vaccines, plasma therapies, and cell therapies. A number of ideas in supply chain analysis and modeling, as well as financial impact forecasting. And then, of course, a number in durable medical equipment development and manufacturing, as well as some others. So we gathered far more ideas and potential budgets than we could possibly afford. But I think that really speaks to the enthusiasm that our community, and I don't think we're special amongst the Manufacturing USA institutes. I think all of the members of these institutes, and I think it's around 2,000 strong organizations that are members of one of these institutes, I think there is a strong will and a strong interest in trying to help the nation move forward. So that has me, think a little bit about some policy considerations. On the right-hand side here, I just want to reflect that the institutes, they span multiple business sectors and ecosystems, and I think that's a real opportunity. It's a national network of organizations and individuals with different capabilities, different networks, different expertise. The directors of the institutes since this outbreak have been talking regularly. Every week we have a meeting, we exchange ideas, we exchange information, and we start brainstorming how we can, as an ecosystem and a network, contribute to the national response, not only for COVID, but thinking about, as John reflected, I think importantly, the next crisis, which could be medical or it could be in some other form. But what can we do to try to prepare the nation, and who else needs to be parts of these conversations around manufacturing resiliency for our country? Certainly the programmatic focus on domestic manufacturing capability and supply chains is important. And at the bottom of that list on the right-hand side, just reflect that we do represent the interest of a lot of different agencies, and I think that is very important and critical as you need a whole of government strategy to respond to these crises. So we think about the institutes as a vehicle for relying on these public-private partnerships to focus on domestic manufacturing capabilities and to use these institutes as vehicles to support response to a crisis through manufacturing capabilities, as well as to potentially stimulate economic recovery moving forward. We would, I think, argue that we see value in supporting a longer-term strategy to coordinate across agencies and business sectors to help establish a more resilient manufacturing infrastructure. And we think that there's a lot of value in the planning and preparedness expertise that agencies have. BARDA and as well as other agencies, they play a quiet role when there isn't a crisis, but I think we see how important a role they can play when a crisis emerges. So with that, I'll close and thank ASME again for hosting the event, and later on towards the end, be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Kelvin. That was wonderful. And now we're going to turn over to Christine to give us the ASME perspective. Christine?
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much again. I really am thankful for having been invited to this call. And I'll just start off by saying that my name is Christine Reilley. I'll introduce myself again. I'm the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation for ASME. And ASME has also been organizing a response to COVID-19 since early March. And really that response has been categorized into 4 major areas. The first is industry connections. The second refers to STEM education. The third focuses on academic research. And the fourth pertains to government relations. So going into industry connections, one thing that ASME has been doing has been convening the community, really leveraging our strength as a neutral third-party convener. In this case, we're bringing together those in the medical, additive manufacturing, and 3D printing space for weekly Zoom meetings. And at these meetings, we've been bringing together folks from hospitals, manufacturers, service providers, and other areas. And it's really been an interactive, robust discussion every week where members of the community can even informally share some of the challenges they've been encountering and really come together with some brainstorming as how they can solve those challenges. Also, as John Wilczynski mentioned earlier in this call, we've been working with America Makes. In this case, ASME has been jumping into the fray by bringing its modeling and simulation community to the America Makes repository. So in this case, when designs are submitted and vetted through the FDA and the VA, our modeling and simulation experts have been coming in to take a look at which designs are likely to be approved. And then thirdly, ASME's market intelligence unit has been conducting surveys on a bi-weekly basis to really get an understanding of how engineers are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to get a feel for how this is affecting not only their industry, but also their day-to-day jobs, and how they likely are viewing the impact days, weeks, and months from now. And finally, our mechanical engineering magazine continues to provide coverage, just as it always has, about the state of the engineering industry. In this case, every day we see a new article or video about COVID-19. Here on the screen, you'll see just a few screenshots of some of the articles and videos that we're providing. In the STEM education area, we're targeting students and lifelong learners at all phases of their career and education, starting with our Inspire program. This is an e-learning platform where students in grades 4 through 10 can have an interactive online experience in which they learn more about the types of engineering careers that are available and to which they may be suited. Moving along to the university students, ASME just hosted eFest Digital. eFest is something that ASME has been hosting for a few years now, live in the US, India, and Kenya, but due to the recent circumstances, we pivoted to a virtual event this past Saturday, and it was really a huge success. We reached more than 1,800 students from more than 45 countries, and we had talks broadcast via YouTube Live, and it was really quite a success. Finally, we have ASME Learn from Home. This is for engineers, postgraduates who can access e-learning courses at a deep discount. And again, for all these programs, we invite you to visit asme.org /COVID-19. Thirdly, we are continuing to support the academic research community by making our journal articles and proceedings that are relevant to COVID-19 available online at no cost. And here you see some images from a journal article that's being made freely available. And this journal article pertains to the design of a BiPAP mask. And finally, in our government relations sector, you're here for this brief congressional briefing. And we also plan to issue a white paper addressing some of the supply chain concerns that Kelvin and John addressed in their talk. That white paper is going to be released within the next week or two. And again, just to summarize, we have 4 areas where ASME has been playing a major role: government relations, STEM education, academic research, and industry convening. And if we have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain those. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christine, and thanks to John and Kelvin as well for such informative presentations. So now to our attendees, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please send them to us using the Q&A function. We're ready to answer them. But we're going to actually kick off our Q&A with a question that we received prior to the event. And this question goes to you, John. Is there a need for additional technical assistance for manufacturers to figure out how to retrofit their production lines in order to produce needed medical equipment? For some context, DOE has proposed providing this kind of assistance through its national labs, but it's unclear how much this technical assistance is needed. So some information on how this is being utilized to Manufacturing USA would be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's, we've certainly seen the need and opportunity there. And in some cases, there's been great examples. In other cases, there's a number of folks who are sitting back, unsure of what to do next. And in many cases, we've seen a wide variety of organizations from, smaller shops to large manufacturers who aren't exactly sure what to do next, or whether they respond to a DPA Title III, or how to retool, for lack of a better term, their facility. And there's one of the things that we've run into more often than not, and admittedly our team is not experts in the medical community like Kelvin's team is. This has been a learning experience for all of us. So one thing that we've tried to do is educate as much as possible and make things as clear as possible for folks. So there's certainly a need for investment in technical assistance. I think we have a great opportunity through things like what we're doing, what NIIMBL is doing, what many of the other institutes are doing through the public-private partnerships to coordinate that response. DOE is certainly very capable, but I think it's something where we need to make sure we're investing in diverse approaches, not necessarily doing one-off answers, although in some cases those are certainly needed. But there's a tremendous need to get these manufacturers who are extremely capable, if they're just given the right information on how to, whether it's retool or if it's as simple as knowing how to label and package and make something available that they did produce available. We've heard some stories of folks, providing goods and then them not being used because they didn't follow a particular process. And ourselves and ASME, I've been on all of the weekly calls that they've had for, a month plus now. Those kinds of things keep coming up. And that's from organizations who are, in some cases very large and they don't know what to do. So there's certainly a need for it right now, but maybe more importantly, as we try to figure out how to accelerate our recovery and readiness moving forward, one of the things that I'll say are trying to promote is the need for more awareness in this space. So when the machine shop or injection mold facility comes to us and is plenty capable of retooling their line, but they don't know what to go do next, that's a problem. That's not acceptable. And if we want to get to the point where we're taking advantage of conventional process, we need to be able to get them this technical assistance much more rapidly. And there's a lot of ways I think we can do that, but I guess the really long answer to the question is yes, more technical assistance is certainly needed. I think there's a role for all of us on the phone and many others to play a lead in coordinating that response.
Great, thanks, John. Kelvin, we're going to pivot over to you. We have a question from ASME President. Are you coordinated with FEMA?
We have not coordinated with FEMA. We have interactions with obviously the FDA, with NIH and NIST, but we haven't had those interactions yet. I think it's an opportunity to interact with them and ensure that what we're doing is part of a coordinated response, but we haven't yet made that connection.
Great, thanks. And then a question from our YouTube channel. This John, this is for you and also Kelvin a little bit. What about the manufacturers in the US and abroad whose certificates are expired? How does that work for them?
Sorry, I was reading the question. So I don't know that I know the answer to that. Certificates are expired, especially for pressure vessel manufacturers. So it's dependent on what kind of device or item that you're trying to produce. Ultimately, and that landscape has changed very rapidly over the past couple of months. And there's new guidance coming out regularly from FDA and other regulatory bodies around who can produce what maybe relaxation in requirement, or excuse me, regulatory advice has come through. So it's really dependent. In some cases, things have been relaxed to the point where you do not need GMP or good manufacturing practice and don't necessarily have to fall under the ISO medical standard, and I'll let those of you that understand that better than I do to have that in place. In other cases, that is absolutely not the case, and it is not going to change. So again, very dependent on, the criticality of use is really what it is on. And that's why we're trying to make it as visible as possible. If you come to, in our case, the site to look at what designs are available, you can enter in and see, do I have these checks? Yes, I can make a face shield. Absolutely. If I don't have this check, I cannot make a nasal swab. There's things like that we just have to be aware of, and it gets certainly more complicated as the item gets more critical.
Terrific, thanks. Kelvin, I'm going to turn your attention over to the Q&A box. We have a question from Bob Hawk. If you could kind of give the answer to, given the NIIMBL's mission to accelerate manufacturing innovation, and given the debacle of the testing and tracing painfully slowly ramp up, how do we not repeat the failure with the plan to ramp up capacity and distribution to scale vaccine manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a really important and a really great question. So I think the direction when it comes to vaccines, obviously the number in the question is 350 million or more doses. That's assuming a single dose per American citizen. I think when you think about this globally, and you don't know if it's going to be a single dose or maybe somebody has to get dosed twice, you're potentially talking about billions of doses. And I think this is where there is power in the private sector, that those companies that do a lot of vaccine manufacturing are used to the idea that they will have to prepare and make available that many doses. And inside this country, the regulators are familiar and comfortable with the idea that many, many millions of doses are going to have to be made available. The question is, how do you do it in a short period of time? And there, what I'm already seeing is a lot of vaccine manufacturers, without even knowing if their vaccine is going to make it through clinical trials, they're already acquiring the ability to scale out manufacturing. They're acquiring contract manufacturing capabilities. They're preparing, they're signing contracts. They're absorbing some of that risk in the anticipation that their product will be available so that it can be made very quickly. But that really points to perhaps a policy related issue, which is that, in normal times, companies normally wouldn't accept that kind of risk and they would wait. And that's part of why it takes a long time to bring vaccines to market. An agency like BARDA does have the ability to co-invest alongside private sector entities and therefore absorb some of that financial risk to accelerate timelines. And that's where I think the federal government can play a role by de-risking some of these investments and allowing the companies to prepare and scale out their manufacturing and scale up the manufacturing as well in advance of anticipating having a vaccine available.
Great, thanks, Kelvin. Moving, was going to skip over in the Q&A to a question that involves all three of our panelists. Is there an easy means by which you're able to get your innovations into the supply chain? If so, how is it working? Could there be improvements? If not, what are your recommendations for rapidly transitioning new capabilities to the U.S. manufacturing ecosystem? Be curious to hear from all three of your perspectives, since you all come from slightly different backgrounds. John, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So we're focused on additive manufacturing. Certainly, there's overflow into a number of different advanced manufacturing processes that we're very interested in. I think we're getting pulled into. So it's a yes and a no for us. I would say the yes is there is certainly opportunity to get your ideas and inventions, if you will, into the supply chain. We have an entire process set up right now with you can post your item to the NIH site. It gets uploaded as a prototype. It then goes through an evaluation process, then gets down selected. Ultimately, we have the VA is doing the majority of that work. Recently, ASME has started to get engaged in that as well. So there's so many models out there right now. We're trying to shift some, shift over to a more model-based, or I'll say simulation-based approach to quickly review, down select, prioritize, and then push those items over to the VA for evaluation and testing. So there is a mechanism, if it is a printed component, to get it through the system. However, if it is related to a critical component, life-saving device or something like that, it still has to follow certain regulatory path through FDA. So there is opportunity. We have items out there that are posted. There are some EUAs in the works that have specifically called out open source approaches and posting on NIH that are being worked. Those are not in the position where they're completed yet. So that's the yes side of it. There certainly are items that, it's more difficult to get into the supply chain, and it really is, again, dependent on type of device. For us, we have a process around printed components. How that transitions to conventional, that becomes a little bit more complicated. So hopefully that partially answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Kelvin?
Yeah, I think, I'll echo what John said. I think we are looking at the issue. We're starting to model the issue. I think one of the things about NIIMBL, we're typically in an industry vertical. And so we can understand the elements of the supply chain that are related to the kinds of things that we normally work on. What we're seeing now in terms of COVID response is that we're being pulled, our expertise is being pulled in directions that stretch beyond our initial vertical because we have the expertise and capability and the connections to try to address those issues. And the further we delve into this, frankly, the harder it is for me to fully understand how the breadth and the depth of the impact we can have when it comes to supply chains. And the reason I mention that is as I talk to the other institute directors, I see that elements of that expertise across the institutes, whether it's the Smart Manufacturing Institute and their knowledge of sensors and how sensors could be communicating across manufacturers and suppliers, whether it's MXD in digital, whether it's even remade on the sustainability end for thinking about life cycle. I think there's opportunities and expertise across the institutes that, if brought together, could really form, I think, a really deep, rich knowledge base about how to most effectively address some of the supply chain issues that we're seeing.
Great, thanks. Christine, could you kind of provide a little bit of perspective about what ASME is doing in this area?
Sure. I'll just echo John's and Kelvin's comments by saying that we have short-term and long-term views on this. For the short term, we have had some engineers, designers coming to ASME and expressing their interest in helping and providing their thoughts on various designs and new quote-unquote inventions. We have been directing those engineers to the America Makes repository that John's been discussing, because we really do see the need to provide a centralized location where those designs can be submitted. Looking at the long term, however, ASME is going to convene its experts from many different verticals, from many different areas, to really do a deep dive into lessons learned, so that for future events, we can understand and propose ways to incorporate a greater degree of agility into the supply chain going forward. So we can institute new best practices in preparation for future events.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Moving on to a more policy-focused question, Have any of you heard from federal agencies that you've worked with that they don't have the authorities they need that would have helped them? In addition, have you found MEPs to be helpful? So again, we can kind of go down the chain. John, we'll start with you.
So I don't, my immediate reaction would be no. And being a DoD institute, we've been working, outside of NIH and VA and FDA and that channel. We have worked very closely with the DoD. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of resource available across, the services, the labs, test facilities, et cetera. And they have a tremendous need for equipment themselves. So we've been very engaged with that community. There's been stood up a joint acquisition task force that we've been meeting with very regularly to make sure that we're leveraging each other. As far as having the right authority or not, I think the thing that we've seen most is coordination and getting those folks that want to help, and this is no different than industry, connected back to those that are the regulatory owners is what's most important. And granted, for the DoD, and I won't pretend to be an expert, but there are different, MedCom and different things like that exist within the DoD that work very closely historically with the FDA. So I think that has been, it's worked well together. I can't identify any specific, somebody had a great idea and just didn't have the right authority to move forward with it. I don't know enough about where we're at with DPA Title III and those kinds of things where there's been some very quick turn requests put in, and they've got tremendous response from the community. And I know they've taken action on a number of different things and started a conventional, or I guess supplementing the supply chain with a lot of US manufacturers. But I'm not close enough to it and don't have insight into if there's things that they needed more authority on to better support.
Kelvin, do you have anything else to add to that?
I don't have a lot of specific examples, but I do think there's questions, and this is actually related to another. My response here will be a little bit related to another question that's been posed around contracting mechanisms and awarding of federal financial assistance, and the extent to which available contracting mechanisms can be used to just acquire, for example, or help a for-profit entity just tool up and expand manufacturing capability, versus to what extent is it for a research or a development purpose. But I really haven't been involved in a lot of conversations around that. But that is the only thing that has come into my sphere that could be contracting authorities for some of the agencies. I haven't heard anything else. I think the MEPs have been helpful on that other element to this question, in that there are a lot of small companies out there that are parts of the supply chain, and helping them ramp up as quickly as possible, educating them and informing them. For example, John referred to a lot of the regulatory issues that come into play for some of these medical products. Helping educate and inform them about what the issues are can accelerate their ability to get on board and scale up.
Great, thanks. And Christine, I know you and I have worked pretty closely, as I'm the government relations person at ASME and you're our head strategy person. But kind of, I guess, from a more technical perspective, would you find that your engagement with Manufacturing USA and any other federal agencies has run into any particular roadblocks or any areas that you find they would like some help going forward?
Just from our perspective, really, we've been working very closely, as I mentioned, with, we've been working with America Makes in terms of the modeling and simulation connection to help vet some of those designs. But really, just again, to echo Kelvin's comments, that we're seeing a need to perhaps educate engineers and designers out there about the requirements for submitting a design or a product for approval in the medical space. So helping them understand what FDA regulations, the various classes, class 1, 2, and 3, just really providing that education to those in the engineering community has really been really paramount here.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Well, keeping an eye on the time, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I would like to throw it back to all of our panelists just for some closing remarks before we end. Kind of what is something we all need to be aware of going forward? John, we'll start with you.
Okay, perfect. I think, and I kind of closed my couple of minutes, and someone specifically asked about what do we need, what new legislation would help, how do we help address the stockpile? So I'll try to cover a couple of these things. Ultimately, we need to focus on recovery and readiness. Those are the two plays that we have right now, and we need to make sure we're coordinated in our response. And whether we play a role in that or don't, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's about making sure that we are able to recover quickly and are better prepared for the future. Ultimately, supply chain resiliency has been our problem. So there's a number of different funding opportunities out there that are trying to address these things. We need to get some of these capabilities, reshored, and we understand that. I think we understand that better than ever before with this current crisis. But ultimately, my three closing points from before are creating a national strategy. So how do we build a national strategy around, for us, additive manufacturing? How do we make sure we're investing in that strategy? So we're using it as our tech investment strategy. And how are we leveraging those entities that exist, whether it's our organization as America Makes, as organizations like ASME and other standards body. There's a number of great resources out there. We need to make sure we're convening, coordinating, and catalyzing the industry collectively around the problem so that we can be better prepared for the future.
Great, thanks. Kelvin?
Yeah, I would actually echo a lot of those points. I think as we start to think about how to respond to the current situation, but also importantly prepare for the future, I think that supply chain and manufacturing capacity and capability resiliency obviously has been exposed as an issue. And industrial policy is not something that we've ever really done as a nation, and I don't know that we need to go that far, but I think thinking about the framework that exists for the Manufacturing USA Institutes as an infrastructure that can be built upon, that relies not only on the federal government, but co-investment by the private sector, relies on the expertise from the academic sector and other nonprofits, and thinking about a coordinated way, a more strategic vision for how we can invest so that we frankly have a more modest investment on a regular basis so that we don't have to make these massive investments in response to a crisis. You can't be prepared for every crisis, but I think we could, I think it's fair to say we could have made a little bit more investment and that might have perhaps lessened some of the impact, although I think the impact still isn't known from the current crisis. But there is an existing framework in place that I think we could build from.
Great, thank you. Christine?
I also agree with the points that both John and Kelvin made. Really understanding and learning from this current situation so that will allow us to prepare for future crises as they arise. Really taking those lessons learned, developing best practices, and also engaging various disciplines across different industries and verticals. Just simply even having physicians work more closely with engineers and manufacturers so that we can have a better response down the road. Also speaking from an engineering perspective and from ASME's perspective, we are looking at how new technologies, digital technologies such as AI and machine learning can be incorporated to make for a more robust supply chain manufacturing operations down the line as well. So that's another area where ASME is focusing.
Great, thank you. And before we close, I'd actually like to throw it back to Tom Costabile. Tom, do you have any words of wisdom for us to end on?
And all I wanted to say was thank you to our panelists today, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. It's an interesting time for all of us. I would offer one piece that I find that I found in the past navigating large companies through these types of crises. The one thing different this time is that this is global. All of the other disasters that I was involved with were always local, but yet we had other parts of our operations effectively supporting the rest of the enterprise. The one thing I would say is that when you communicate, please communicate with compassion. You've heard a lot of what engineers can do today. It's the compassion, it's the commitment to engineering excellence that makes us great. Kelvin, John, Christine, thank you guys. I'm proud to be part of the same team that you guys are on, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Anne and everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Tom. And as it's clear to see, these conversations are just beginning. ASME wants to continue these conversations. We have several more briefings planned. We hope you will all join us as we have those briefings and continue these conversations. If you would like to reach out, if we did not get to answer any of your questions today, please see attached the speaker's contact information and feel free to reach out to us. Thank you all so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks all.